for coming on a almost summer evening. Tonight we're welcoming the University of Montana group, and they're joining us via video streaming. So welcome to those guys, and it'll be nice to kind of expand the scope of our audience. I want to mention that these information sessions are made possible by a very generous donation from the Richard and Francine Loeb Family Foundation. And so we were hoping that they would be here tonight and we could give them a hand, but they are not here, and but we'd like to thank them anyway. A couple housekeeping events. If you have cell phones, if you could turn it on to silent or vibrate, that would be helpful, or beepers. And then the bathrooms are, if you are outside, if you go out of the auditorium area and turn left, there's a set of bathrooms, and then a smaller set of bathrooms on the right also. So getting closer to the meat of the matter, we're thrilled to have Carol Carruthers here to talk about the IEP process, which is something that many of our families or you have to deal with. It's really helpful, I think, to be well informed going into the process. Carol is probably the most experienced person in the state to deal certainly with kids who have hearing loss, with families of kids who have hearing loss and the kids themselves. And so we're thrilled to have her here. I think a lot of the information will be general principles, and I think that's always helpful as well. We do have evaluation forms, and so we'd like you to jot down how helpful you thought the information is. It's helpful for us. It's helpful for presenters, I think, in general, to know how they're doing as far as presenting material. And then it also gives you an opportunity to indicate any other topics that you might be interested in hearing at future information sessions. So Carol Carruthers is the Washington Sensory Disability Services Coordinator, thank you. She provides technical assistance to school districts, families with deaf and hard of hearing children, and other providers, school providers in the state. She assists in child assessment, IEP development, program planning, training school district personnel on the needs of children with hearing loss. And she's really dealt with kids of all ages, all the way through the school program. So we'd like to welcome Carol. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Is this volume okay? Can you hear me all right? It's not too loud? I get excited and then it'll probably be too loud. I am thrilled to be here. Thrilled to meet all of you. So glad you're here. Glad you're interested in this topic and are getting knowledge up front before you get into the schools and or the next time you go into an IEP. Just to explain a little bit, Washington Sensory Disabilities Services, WSDS. There's too many S's in that, but when you answer the phone, it sounds like too many S's. It's wsdsonline.org if you want to look us up. And we are a project of the State Education Department, OSPI. Almost 12 years ago, it'll be 12 years ago in the fall, they pulled smaller programs together and then added my position. So there are 4 state coordinators. One is for deaf and hard of hearing, that's me. There's another one for blind, low vision, another one for deaf blind, and another person for birth to 3 services, whether that child has a hearing loss, a vision loss, or a combination of the 2. And we are to support both families and school districts that work with kids in have those disabilities. So part of my job is to go into a school and observe a student. I can be called by the parent, or I can be called by a teacher or a principal or an interpreter, whatever, that says, could you just come and see if we're doing this right? Or if there's something that we're missing, or something we need to add, or something like that. So then I will go to the school district and I will observe a student, and then we meet at the end of the day and talk about what suggestions I might have. That's part of it. The other part of it is training. I do lots of training for staff and families. All sorts of training. In July we have a whole week training for both educational interpreters and for teachers of the deaf in literacy and assessment and various things. So that's kind of the job. I drive a lot. I was just telling these guys I was in Spokane on Monday and Pasco on Tuesday, Seattle today, and Olympia tomorrow. Go home tomorrow afternoon. All right, so let's talk about IEPs. I don't know where you are. Some of you have had 10 years worth of IEPs so far. Some of you might be just coming out of a Birth to 3 program and you're going to start the IEP process. But let's just cover all of it just in case there's somebody that doesn't have a lot of experience yet. First, an IEP is a written document that describes the educational program that's developed by a team, including the parent. Parent is an equal member of that team. Addresses the child's unique needs. It's written for each student that's eligible for special education. It's developed, it's reviewed, and it's revised. IFSP is for birth to 3, and IEP is for 3 to 21. The forms that every district will use will be different. Don't ask me why. The state issues a state-approved form, and then every district decides, well, we want to have our own. So they develop their own unique forms, and every district will look a little bit different. The IEP form looks a little bit different. Okay, first let's kind of wrap our minds around this. People think IEP, I have an IEP meeting at school. It's going to be a 1-hour meeting or a 2-hour meeting. But I want you to not think of an IEP as being a meeting. I want you to think of it as being a year-long process. It's an entire year. You can change it as often as you want to, amend it, revise it, review it. You can call a meeting whenever you want to. Whenever you don't think that it's working the way you thought it was, or what you thought was going to happen isn't happening, so you want to meet again. So it's not a one-time meeting. It's not a one-time shot. It's an entire year-long process. The team, as we mentioned, is responsible for developing, reviewing, and revising it as you go for a year. And it requires ongoing open communication. It's a process that requires collaboration. The process has to keep kids' needs first and foremost. Nothing is written in stone. The IEP is a guide. If something doesn't work, it can be changed. Or you can decide that we're going to do this for 3 months and then we're going to meet again and see what we think. Or let's write it for 6 months and then we'll stop and we'll meet again and see if it works. So what's at the heart of an excellent and successful IEP process? What do you see as being an attitude, abilities, information, values? What contributes to a collaborative team? You're all on teams, either at work or community service that you might do, different interests that you might have. You've all worked on teams. So what makes it collaborative?
Being open-minded.
Being open-minded. Wow, excellent. Absolutely. The child's interest being every person that's there. If the child's interest is their goal, you'll have a more collaborative team. Absolutely right. You want this to be a collaborative team, right? Potentially, you have 15 years with these people in a school district, or however long you're going to stay there. You want this to be successful, meaningful, mutually supportive, successful. So you have to start thinking, what attitude do I need to bring to the table? What values do I bring to the table? Values of respect for everybody there, respect for a teacher that's been there for 20 years, seen lots of 6-year-old kids, never seen mine, but he or she has seen lots of 6-year-olds and does have some valuable experience and information to share with the team. What hinders a successful team? What hinders the success of a collaboration? Egos. Lack of teamwork. Pardon, bureaucracy, yep. Absolutely. Emotions. It can, it doesn't have to. You're speaking to a very emotional person. And I know what it's like to go to the principal's office myself. I have 2 boys, thank goodness they're out of high school. But I've been in that principal's office before and thought, what am I doing here? Because my son parked his truck on the berm of this ice pack because he wanted to prove to everybody that his truck, you know, it's Ellensburg. I live in Ellensburg. And he wanted to prove that he could get that Toyota to the very top of that ice pack and got suspended for 2 days. So I'm called into the office, right? So yeah, emotions don't have to. I think emotions are normal, and IEPs are emotional things because it's your kiddo. It's your kiddo, and you want the very best. So from an emotional standpoint, I think it's okay to be emotional. What else? What hinders it?
The teachers and the counselors not knowing the particular disability.
Ah, excellent. Excellent. Not knowing the disability very well. Don't get the proper IEP because they don't have people on the team that have experience or expertise in that particular disability. I find, too, districts or people that don't seek information. They don't try and find experts to help them make a decision. Consequently, they make, in my opinion, odd decisions. Decisions that don't make sense because they're not based on appropriate things, based on equipment. Hearing aids versus cochlear implants or something like that.
They make assumptions. They treat children with one different need as, you know, like my son is hearing impaired, but he was microtic, atresious, so they assume his hearing impairment is the same as every other hearing impaired kid.
Good point. Very good point. And no 2 kids are going to be the same. And even if they have the exact same audiogram, they're not going to be the same. Yeah, so assumption is a big hindrance. Good point.
As a parent, not knowing what your rights are or what you can expect,
Uh-huh.
that's what I'm finding.
Excellent. Very, very good. You had another comment? No? Okay. So IEPs are complex, and they're complex because no 2 are the same. No 2 children are the same. There's no formula. Every child that has this kind of an audiogram gets this kind of an IEP. That, of course, is not appropriate. They're all different. Every child is different, and every IEP should be based on that individual child's unique needs. It requires learning on everyone's part. I've been in deaf education for 30 years, and I learn something every IEP that I go to, every single one. There's lots of syndromes that I have no idea what you're talking about, and I have to do a lot of research before I even go to find out what's this one all about? What are the things that might be involved with this kiddo? But it requires learning on everyone's part. Requires conversations on everyone's part, and sometimes a series of difficult conversations that continue throughout the year. The success of the IEP team is in direct correlation to the quality of your conversations. So just because of that, I would suggest that there are many conversations that you have. So you can build up positive conversations with your team. And then when you have to have a difficult conversation, it isn't the only conversation. Does that make sense?
My son has autoology processing disorder,
Uh-huh.
which is like a hidden type of disease.
Right.
And I have had a lot of conversations with my IEP, but because it's hidden, it slips, and then they start treating him as if he's a normal student, and he gets behind in his grades, and I have to go back in and talk to them, and it's always difficult, even when I gave him the information to begin with on
Right.
his particular disability.
They follow through.
Yeah.
The follow-through is
It
always
just
hard.
falls because it's a hidden.
Mhm.
So just having conversations, to me, doesn't help.
And how do you stay involved?
You have to stay involved.
Okay.
You have to-
Without, without.
Doesn't have to be negative. You can stay involved without it becoming negative. It can be a positive. That you're in that classroom, your nose is in that room, you know what's happening, you're pretty tuned in to what's going on. It doesn't have to be a negative thing. You can always be encouraging when you go in and talk positively. But there's things that you can do to continually remind them that this one is going to be difficult because he's not going to be able to process this.
I do that. Thanks, science teachers told me in the school year, so she's glad to be pregnant.
The purpose of any team is to learn from each other. Team members need to use phrases that acknowledge diverse opinions and show interest in another person's opinion. A parent has known that child from day one. You've gone to every audiology appointment. You've gone to every doctor appointment. You've gone to all of those kinds of appointments, and you have a lot of information to share. That information needs to be shared with the team, and they need to respect that you have a lot of information to share and be willing to listen to it. By the same token, you as a team member need to be willing to listen to what they have to tell you, what they bring to the table, based on their years of experience with kids and what they know about what they know. Success comes from what was this name? The batteries ran out or what? Yeah, I was supposed to give the pen, but I don't see the, there he is. He says, give me the pen and look and all. I just think the battery. Yeah, it's on. It's like this at school. I was in school the other day and the teacher had an FM system on. He had a tie. And he had put the FM microphone on his tie. And then he flipped his tie on. It was down his back. Oh, God. When someone comes to the meeting with I have to tell them this. I know they're not aware of this one thing. I have to tell them this. Make sure they understand that this doesn't work, whatever it happens to be. When you come to a meeting like that, you know what happens. You can't hear anything prior to the point where you finally get that out of your mouth, right? So put that on a piece of paper and have it there by your side so that you can let go of that, participate in the meeting, and then when it's the appropriate time, you get to make that statement. Pull that out. Okay, what can a parent do? Number one thing I believe every parent should do is ask for a draft of the IEP a couple days before your meeting. And if you can't get a draft of the IEP, say, dang, then I guess we'll just have to wait and meet a little bit later. Here's why. They have had a chance to look at the information, the assessment results. They've had a chance to draft their present levels of performance, the information that they have about your student. They've had a chance to even talk about it, probably. You've had no chance. You can't go to a meeting and look at the information, digest the information, think about what you want to add to it, all on the fly like that. You deserve a chance to look at it when you're sitting at your kitchen table with a cup of coffee and you can take your pencil out and you can say, I'd like to add this to this. Or I think this seems odd, or I don't understand this. Ask for a copy of the IEP a couple days before you're going to have your meeting.
What happens if you take out some of the evaluation that's not true and they still won't take it out? Will you do that? South Public School District and Kent did that. They put in things that weren't true. Because I said, this isn't correct. And they
So what I would want to do is see the raw data. Show me the assessment result. Show me the protocol sheet that you used when you were doing the assessment so I can verify where you got those results. that you can also add in a statement that you do not agree with the assessment information, that you believe it to be not accurate.
And that gets written in the IEP
Yes.
and is part of the whole record?
Yes. Postpone the meeting if you're not able to have a draft ahead of time. Write down goals and objectives that you would like to see in the IEP. You are a part of the team, so put down your own goals and objectives that you would like to see. I've had parents when I had classrooms that said, what I really want is my child to be able to do a two-step direction. Go into your bedroom and get your coat. That's my goal. I want my kid to have it be able to do a two-step direction. So we added that to the IEP. It's a great goal. And then submit those, either email or something, ahead of the meeting so they have a chance to look over those also. Bring them with you to the meeting, though, too. Now, if you have not seen an IEP before, if you're new to this and you don't know what they look like, you can go to OSPI, Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, our state education department, and that URL right there will show you some samples. It also has an evaluation form for an IEP, kind of a checkoff. Do you see this? Do you see this? Do you see this? Do you see this? Then the other thing is to get and read a copy of the WACs. No, it's not. It's not. This is Washington Administrative Code. This is what we all use to figure out what we're supposed to be doing. And then when you get it, you can call the number at the bottom, that third bullet there, and ask for a copy. Kim told me that she went to my URL right there and she says it didn't work. I did it and it worked, so I don't know. You might have to call. But when you get it, then do like I do and put sticky notes all the places that you find interesting or pertinent to you. So I have assistive technology marked. I have highly qualified, definitions of disability, related services, parents taking sign classes, transition, personnel stuff, interpreting stuff, considered language needs. So I have it highlighted. It's not hard to read, and every parent should have a copy. Every parent should have a copy. So you can look and see who should be on the committee. In fact, as we go through this, you'll find most of it is I've taken it verbatim out of here with the page number on it, so you could look at it later when you get your copy. Uh-huh. This one is 2009, November 1st, 2009. It's downloadable on the OSPI website also. Okay, so some of the things that I think are important for every parent to know is who is on the team, the IEP team. This is right out of the WACs. The parents are at least one general ed teacher if the student is participating in gen ed classes, general education classes. At least one special education teacher, a representative who is qualified to provide specially designed instruction, like a special education teacher. Some of these people might be, one person might be two of these, represent two of them. A person who is knowledgeable about general ed curriculum and knowledgeable about the availability of resources in the school district. So a person that can say, yes, we can do that, or no, we can't. Yes, we can provide more SLP time, or no, we can't. Any other person that the parent or the district would like to invite who has knowledge or expertise about the disability, or anybody else the parent would like to invite. And I would encourage you to bring somebody with you, especially to take notes, because it's emotional. It's hard to sit there and listen and take it all in, especially if your spouse isn't with you. There's nothing worse than you go home and your spouse says, well, why did they do that? Well, I don't know. Well, did you ask about this? It didn't occur to me to ask about that. Take notes. Also, if you have somebody there and they can say, well, do you remember that you were concerned about the bus because the bus gets him to school 20 minutes late every day? Don't forget we want to talk about that. Oh, yeah, thank you. Because you have a lot going on. And it's helpful to have somebody else there. It can be a neighbor, it can be a mother, another mother, it could be anybody. And you can bring a student when it's appropriate. Okay, what's in the IEP? Students' present level of performance, where they're actually functioning now in all of the areas that they're going to work on: math, reading, written language, speech articulation, language, spoken language. The goals and the objectives and how they are to be measured. How are they going to determine if they've met the goal or not, the objective or not? A list of necessary accommodations, which we'll talk about more in a second. Placement information. Where's this plan, this IEP, going to be carried out? Where's the placement? A list of services, along with the schedule and the timeline of those services. So speech therapy, occupational therapy, how much time will they get and how often per week? When you develop an IEP, the team has to consider the strengths of the student, the concern the parent has for their student, the academic development and functional needs of the student. I'm going to stand over here so I'm not turning around to read this. And this one is about language, the language and communication needs of the student. This comes right out of the WAC. Every team must consider opportunities for direct communication with peers and professional personnel in the student's language and communication mode. That can be pretty important in particular cases, especially if a student is very isolated and your desire is that they be with a peer group with the same communication mode that they have. That's right out of the WACs, page 62. Also looking at academic level, full range of needs, including opportunities for direct instruction in the student's language and communication mode, as opposed to through an interpreter, direct communication with the teacher. Whether the student needs assistive technology devices and services.
I'm sorry, you said direct with the teacher?
Yes, if it's a student that's using sign language, you have to consider it doesn't mean you have to go with this, you have to consider, do they need direct communication with the teacher, a teacher of the deaf that can sign, or is it appropriate to go through an interpreter for their instruction in a gen ed classroom?
What if you wanted it to be directly with the teacher?
Then that's a team consideration, you're part of the team, so that's what you bring up.
But if
To
they
the
say
team.
it can't be possible, that still would fall within.
It's a
state
very appropriate
guidelines.
request. It's a very appropriate request, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about what happens if you disagree.
Okay.
But that's a very appropriate request to put to the table as a parent. Because the WACs say that we have to consider that. Okay, placement considerations are determined annually. So every year you have the same discussion. Decisions made by a team, including parents and other persons knowledgeable about the students. Placement considerations are decisions made by considering the evaluation data and all the options available. And they're based on the IEP and the least restrictive environment. The least restrictive environment doesn't mean no, let me back up. Sometimes the least restrictive back up again. Sometimes the most restrictive environment on the list is the most appropriate. And that's okay. I'll explain that. If you, let's say I have a student that is in Tenasket. Do you know where Tenasket is? North of Chelan, Omak, Okanagan, Omak, Tenasket, almost to the Canadian border. You're the only deaf child in the county, or let's say the town. No deaf adults for role models, no fluent people in your world to give you more language. other than the interpreter that's assigned to you at school. Now, the most restrictive environment would be to take you out and send you to the School for the Deaf in Vancouver as a residential student, right? You'd leave on Sunday, come back on Friday, and spend the weekend at home. That would be the most restrictive in that you're not in your neighborhood school with your neighborhood friends and a teacher that you go home every night. So it's the most restrictive, but it could be the most appropriate for that child's needs. Does that make sense? So when I talk about least restrictive, I try and talk about, at the same time, what's the most appropriate? Peer interaction, teacher of the deaf, role models. Getting to see another child with a hearing aid is very, in my opinion, important. Getting to see another child with cochlear implant is important. Getting to see older people with that is important for some kids. The placement option must provide a reasonably high probability of assisting a student to attain his or her goals. So wherever you decide, whatever program you put them in, it should provide a reasonably high probability that in that placement they will be able to achieve their goals. Consider any potential harmful effect on the student or on the quality of services that they need. So you have to consider, are they going to be on a bus for an hour and a half one way and they're 3 years old? Or 2 hours one way? That's a potential harmful effect. Unless the IEP requires other arrangements, the student will be educated in the school that they would normally attend if they didn't have a disability, the one down the street that their brother or sister would go to. Unless there's something else to consider, which there usually is. If they need other arrangements, placement will be made as close as possible to the student's home. But again, you still have to look at what placement is the most appropriate for that student. Students will not be removed from age-appropriate general education classes just because they need modification in curriculum. Because you can modify the curriculum and keep them in that regular classroom. Okay, so let's talk about accommodations.
Can I back up a slide?
You bet.
They don't take them out, but yet they don't educate them either. They stick them off to the side and don't give them any work. They don't call on them, nothing.
So that would be a reason to get your team back together and talk about that. Because if they're ignored in a classroom, that's not appropriate.
No, it took pulling teeth to explain that to them. And I had to have them reevaluated. And then I had them evaluated, and the counselor pulled his IEP for when he was 6 forward and went with that.
You know, it might be better if I just sit down and talk to you because it'll be too specific to your situation. Okay, so amplification accommodations might be, oh, and I put this in here, school districts, this is in the wax again, school districts must ensure that hearing aids worn in school by a student are functioning properly. Each school district must ensure that the external components of a surgically implanted medical device is functioning properly. So that means, A, they should be checking it. They should be checking the hearing aids. They should make sure there's batteries at school to have batteries there in case they die. But if you go to a district, when I go to a district, if they don't have a lot of experience, I'll say, what's your system for checking the equipment? You mean we're supposed to check the equipment? I didn't know I was supposed to check the equipment. Yeah, you need to be checking to make sure it's working. It changes every district. It changes. Sometimes I try to make sure it's somebody who's there every day. So in some places, the SLP likes to be the one in charge, but typically they're not there every day. They've got 2 schools or 3 schools. So it might be a school nurse. It might be the first period teacher is the one that, generally speaking, I like to make sure the kiddo comes in. You get a little Radio Shack battery checker that's like $5, And they take out their hearing aid, they take the battery, they put it on there, they put the wand on there, and it goes, good. Or I used to teach it's deader than a doornail. When I had preschool kids, I'd say, it's deader than a doornail. And they'd go, what? And then we'd explain that. And I charted it, and we talked about how many days a battery lasts, and how many more days does your last than yours last, and blah, blah. We did all these math activities with it. But there should be a system in place for checking both the FM system and the hearing aid.
Is that true for kids who use hearing aids or whatever device but don't have an IEP? Like if they're,
Like 504 plans?
perhaps a 504?
Yes. I would write it into a 504 plan. This is for IEPs. All of this WAC information is IEP'd, but I would make sure I write that into a 504 plan. Now, many parents make sure their kids' hearing aids are working before they leave for school. Many do not. Many supply batteries for school, that's great. Many don't. So when I go around, when I travel to districts, I say, make sure you have batteries, and make sure you have the stethoscope that you use to check the, what's that called? I was asked that this morning, I couldn't come up with the word. It's the hearing stethoscope thing that you put the mold into the coupler and you can listen to the hearing aid. A listening tube. Why did I have to make it so complicated? A listening tube. That's what every school should have, so a listening tube. Okay, so an amplification accommodation might be a personal FM system, classroom amplification system, sound field system, a video phone. If all the kids have the ability to call mom from the school office, there should be a video phone available for kids with hearing loss if they're using sign language to call home also. And that is free in the school through Sorensen Video Relay. It's also free to you at home if you have signing kids. Noise, reverberation reduction, carpet on the floor, tennis balls on the bottoms of chairs and tables, although an audiologist told me Monday night that now they are concerned about latex with tennis balls. So I don't know what the newer version will be, but for years we've put tennis balls on the bottoms of chairs. Special lighting, room modifications, flashing fire alarm, smoke detector, flashers. Some communication accommodations, priority seating arrangement. Now I most often will see priority seating on an IEP, which I think is very appropriate, but most often I don't see it defined, and I would encourage you to define it. Because if you say, my student gets preferential seating, here's what happens. The gen ed teacher goes, preferential seating, what does that mean? Front and center. So this kid is going to sit right here. Well, that's not a good place for a child with hearing loss for two reasons. One is it's often under a fan, like an overhead projector or a LCD projector fan, which hearing aids will amplify, and they'll compete auditorily with that. It's also a bad place visually because everything is behind them and they have no visual access to the classroom. So they're here. Let me say if I was sitting here and the class is behind me. Who said that? Who said that? They don't have any visual access. So I want to define it maybe this way. Visual access to the classroom and teacher away from mechanical noises such as a heating fan or a computer fan or a refrigerator. I followed one kiddo all day. He was a high school student, getting into major trouble. He has a unilateral hearing loss. Hearing in one side, perfect, and deaf in the other. I followed him all day. There wasn't one class where he sat in the appropriate place. Carson, you are deaf on this side. Why do you sit with this side to the wall and this side to the teacher in the classroom? Well, I don't know. There wasn't one teacher that even knew that he had a hearing loss. And as he walked out of the room and they're calling his name, and he doesn't respond, because now he's concentrating on his next class and getting into his locker and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So he doesn't hear that they've called his name. So he's getting into a lot of trouble. It took a while for them to understand that it does have a huge educational impact when you have a unilateral loss like that. Another one might be obtain a student's attention prior to speaking. Reduce background noise. Often today I went into a reading room. There's 4 small groups in this reading room. with 6 kids at each kidney table. They're all in these small groups reading. Very difficult for a child to concentrate on their group and their teacher. Too much noise. There's no sign language. There was no sign language visual support. It was all auditory. That kiddo very much needed an FM system so she could hear her teacher above the 3 other groups that were in the same room. Or put up walls, temporary walls.
What about when they're breaking out kids like that into small groups, communication with peers?
Doesn't happen.
Because, maybe the teacher has an FM, but what if they're supposed to be interacting with peers?
Yeah, then you either need, the question was, if you have a small group like that, the teacher has the microphone, so the FM works when the teacher is talking, but the other kids are not mic'd. Is that what you're saying? So there's a second microphone that you can get. It's called a conference mic. Kind of looks like a cell phone. And that is a pass-around mic for the kids to use. Or you can put it at the center of the table, and it will get the kids, if they're all sitting around a small enough table, they'll be amplified that way. I usually recommend that.
There's multiple little things going on. Is there a speaker just for them?
Yeah, a personal FM system would just be for them. If they wear hearing aids or cochlear implants, they can have a personal FM system, so a teacher wears a microphone, it goes directly into their, wirelessly, goes into their hearing aid or their implant, speech processor.
How do you get the school to, it's in his IEP that he needs to use the amplifier, but the teachers will not use it. I've called on that from day one.
Call me. I'd love to go in and visit this classroom. Yes, that's awful.
Yeah, they won't. And I walked into that situation that he did the first week, and there was multiple, and there's no way any of the kids were concentrating.
Yeah.
I must have went in the principal's office and complained big time. So yeah, happens all the time.
Call me. I'll try and help. I can't guarantee it. Enhance speech reading conditions by avoiding hands in front of the face, big old mustaches. Gosh, sometimes I see that. Gum, chewing gum. Present information in a simple, structured, sequential manner. Those can be on the IEP as an accommodation. Repeat or rephrase information when necessary. Give them extra time to process it. Check for understanding. I always recommend that a teacher check for understanding, but don't say, "Did you understand?" You all know that, right? They'll always say yes. "Did you hear that?" "Of course I heard it." And they did. They just don't know. You don't know if they got 100% of it or 50% of it, because they heard something, so they say, "Yeah, I heard it. I heard what I heard." But that's no different than hearing kids either. Hearing kids will tell you the same thing. I used to teach sign language for 15 years at Central, and I would say to my sign students in sign, "Do you understand me?" "Mm-hmm." And I'd say, "Okay, tell me." And they'd go, they all, I have no idea what you said. Speech-to-text software. This is something that is very common and popular at the university level, and I'm excited to say it's becoming more popular at younger grades. And what this is there's a couple different kinds. My assistant, Christy, is a speech-to-text transcriber, and I send her out to schools that want to see this demonstration for free. So if you have a kiddo that would fit this, you call us and we can let the school see what this would work, how it would work. But you have a student that is mostly auditory, doing fairly well auditorily, picking things up. But then they get into an advanced placement class or chemistry or biology or English where there's big vocabulary, or it's fast-paced, it's a lot of information, it's a lot to take in auditorily, and they need more visual support. So a speech-to-text is where there is a transcriber in the classroom. They have a small laptop. It's a wireless connection. The student sits at their desk, and they have a small notebook, and they can read everything that's said. The transcriber is transcribing what the teacher says and what the other students say. So it might look something like this. The student is listening to the teacher. Missed the page number. What was it? Okay, okay. They keep going. Okay, I missed, what was that word? And they're using this. Then that is emailed to them, and they have it for their class notes. It's very helpful, but you have to be able to read English at a high enough level that that benefits you. But the kids that have used it so far love it. And most of the kids that we have done demonstrations for said, I never knew that the other kids were talking. I never heard. The teacher was over an FM microphone, but I didn't know that these other kids were talking. And in one case, the little girl said, she's now in high school. At the time that we did it, I think she was in 8th grade. And they were singing Happy Birthday. She didn't know what they were doing. She didn't know what they were singing. She didn't know who was having the birthday. And Christy's typing it out, and she went. So it's very inclusive. It creates a situation where she is now included in the rest of the class. She knows what's going on. She knows what the kids are saying. So it's really a cool thing.
So for clarification, to make that accommodation happen, districts would be then hiring a transcriber.
That's right. Just like you hire an interpreter. But it's a little bit different in that transcription. There are different kinds. There's one that's very expensive, like a court stenographer. They tend to be a lot more expensive because their training is a lot more extensive. There's C-print. It's called C and then print. That's one. And then another one is Typewell. That uses just a laptop, any laptop that the district already has. You don't have to buy anything new. It's nice for the child to have something small so it doesn't take up their desk space. And they don't like it to take up their desk space. So some little small notebook type. It takes 2 months of training online. So it's not a 3-year program or anything like that. And it's very helpful if a sign interpreter, if you have them in the district, if they become dually trained, so they're a little bit more able to accommodate all of the kids in the district. Not just the signing kids, but the kids that are more auditory kids, non-signing kids. And anyway, it's a really cool accommodation. And I think it's beginning to become more and more popular. Mm-hmm. There's an accommodation page. Do you list them all? Uh-huh.
And if you've got a school district that flat refuses your method of interpreting, because our son, after 2 years in the deaf, hard of hearing preschool program with our district, won't sign. He's now doing a private cued speech preschool, and they flat refuse to recognize cued speech. What are your options as he's re-entering?
We'll go back. We'll go to what do you do when there's a disagreement. Cued speech is very popular on the East Coast. Not so much on the West Coast. It's just popping up. So there's not a lot of people trained. You won't, to put an ad out for a cued speech interpreter, it's like, does anybody know anybody that does cued speech? It's not very common. So it's going to take a little time for districts to go, now we have to have what? What's that? Yeah. Oh, and then interpreting, of course. American Sign Language, Sign Exact English, cued speech, or an oral interpreter. You know what an oral interpreter is? Somebody that sits in front of the student and mouths what is being said, and they're reading lips. Instructional accommodations and modifications, visual supplements, having things on an overhead or on a board, smart boards, where kids get the notes, having a note taker, captioning for television programs if you have them, or movies or videos. Puyallup School District has a very cool vocational program where the deaf kids will caption any movie that any teacher, not even in the district but anywhere in the state, if they want to submit. They have the U.S. history teacher has a movie they have to show every single year, and it's so old that it's not captioned. The vocational program at Puyallup will caption it for them for a small amount of money, but you have to have the script that goes with it, so you'd have to get that first. But that's pretty cool that the deaf kids are doing that. Having a buddy system so that you can, without fear of being in trouble, turn to your neighbor and say, what page did she say? I'm not sure if I understood that. Check for understanding of information. The teacher, this would be what you would ask a teacher to do. A little bit of downtime, a little break from watching. How many of you sign in here? Have you ever gone to a workshop or a presentation where the person was just signing and you didn't? There was no nobody was voicing it. Whew. I have, and I am. I'm like, wait a minute. I just want to write that down. It's difficult to take every single thing in this way with no break. You want to just hold it for a minute so I can think about it for a second, or I can, maybe because it's my second language, I want to write down the notes. So it's hard. You need a little break. It's tiring. Extra time to complete assignments, tutoring, changes that you might make to the curriculum that you're using, modify the reading and writing assignment, give extra practice. Pre-teaching vocabulary, I think, is critical for kids that are in Gen Ed. So they're in a science class, and I sit with them the day before, and I talk about the vocabulary that's going to be introduced the next day for this concept.
How do you define a modified writing assignment?
It might be shorter. You might have 5 criteria that the other kids need to have. They have to make sure they do this, 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 and your child might only have 3 or 2. You've changed the evaluation of it. Let's say you're all in the 4th grade. This is just for assigning a situation, though, and not all of you I can tell are signing, but to give you an example. You're in the 4th grade, and I come in as your teacher, and I'm going to say, guess what, you guys? We're going to start this new unit, and it's going to be so cool. And the unit is PHOTOSYNTHESIS. You're going to love it. Okay, you have 2 options. One is, well, what's that? I missed it. And then you kind of perseverate on, what was it, what was it, what was it? Or forget it. Let it go. Who cares? But for a child that is signing and with an interpreter, I don't know about these wonderful interpreters probably have a sign, but I don't have a sign for photosynthesis. So as an interpreter, I might elect to fingerspell it the first time because I don't have a sign for it. Fingerspell it and then explain it a little bit or something. For that reason, you need to pre-teach the vocabulary before they're in the class trying to learn the concept of photosynthesis. So they know the word. They've heard the word. They've seen the word. They know the definition. And then we're going to teach the concept. Strategies to adapt oral curriculum instruction to accommodate a lack of auditory access. Supplemental materials to reinforce concepts of curriculum. More chances, more practice. A different curriculum altogether. Evaluation modification. When should a parent request to reteach or pre-teach?
For the timing of pre-teaching, would it be before the class?
I've seen it all different times. I've seen it actually before school starts.
My son's schedule is already through 1 to 7, and where can I get the time to teach from school?
It would have to be before school, after school, or 1 period a day that he would have to give up.
Extra time. Can I ask extra time?
You can. You can ask. I can't guarantee that the person would be available and it would happen that way, but you could ask for that. Usually it's 1 period a day that they're able to sit with a teacher that can re-explain, reteach, or pre-teach vocabulary, depending on how successful they're being.
On curriculum, is there, my son does half special ed and half regular gen. Is there curriculum in the gen that is a lower reading level
There are some, yes, there are some reading programs that will give you 3 different options, 3 different levels of book reading material with the same topic, which is really cool.
How do they get,
For a theme.
how do they get a hold of that? That the school districts, I hear them saying it, but yet I haven't seen anything come.
Do you know your science book, it's the same basic information that we
But 3 levels. I've not seen science, I've only seen reading. So the topic is tsunamis. And there's 3 different books for your high kids, your medium kids, and your lower kids. But it's all about tsunamis. So you can do science units and all sorts of theme, and they're still reading about tsunamis, even though it's at their level. They just need to buy it. So we just need to give them the information that that's available. I would.
Yeah, they don't.
Tacoma uses it. Tacoma uses that.
Because the specialty always says that there's different levels and she'll get it, but it hasn't.
So, again, I would write that on my list. And next time you meet with them, say, these are some of my concerns. Very politely, very respectfully. Say, I remember that you told me about this, and I wanted to bring this up again because I don't see that it's happening. Do you think we could do that? I would bring that up again.
What I've seen is that they have the different levels available for the reading and writing and the math, which is where they have the special ed classes, but then they get them out into the science and social studies.
That's true.
And they don't have modification.
And that's what I needed.
Yeah, they don't.
Yeah.
I've not seen science that has different reading levels with the same concept in text. I've not seen it in science. Usually a modified curriculum in science is less required. Like I said, there's 5 concepts I want to teach. For this kid, I want to make sure this child has 3 of those 5.
But then this test had the same exact question as the others, but he only has to answer every other one. But the vocabulary is so intense that we're looking up 8 of the 10 words in a sentence. And that's not a modified curriculum.
That's not a modified
Yeah.
curriculum. The test has to follow the curriculum.
Well, they never modified the curriculum, yeah.
I'm wondering, on the pre-teaching concept, you mentioned, maybe doing it a period when it's in middle school. In elementary school, how do you see some of the pre-teaching happen? It's something that's in our IEP and everyone's on board on the team to do it. We just haven't figured out how to make it happen, who it would be, and is it a pull-out session? So who are some of the types of people you see that
That carry it out.
make that happen?
Often it's an interpreter,
And I have a child who is completely oral.
then a para-educator. Is there a para-ed in the classroom?
Not for him.
Or in the building that can come in and pre-teach?
So like a instructional aid?
Instructional aid, instructional assistant. Alternate tests, reading assistance with tests for clarifying directions. Other considerations, expanded core curriculum instruction. Let's see, adding to the curriculum if they're working on adding deaf studies or self-advocacy, sign language, counseling. Notice that? Voc Rehab, you have the director of Voc Rehab right in the audience. Recreational social opportunities, especially if you're in an isolated area. Sign language instruction for family comes under the category of you contributing to the implementation of the IEP. Family support and training, transition, lunch in a quiet setting with 1 or 2 friends. For kids that are oral, that are listening and using spoken language, it's pretty difficult in the cafeteria. It's very loud and the acoustics are horrible. So one alternative is to pick a buddy and go to a different room and have lunch. Sometimes I've had some schools have the vice principal will let the kids come in and have lunch at a table in their office, the SLP or the school nurse. So that it's just one-on-one because it's really hard in a cafeteria. The IEP is accessible to each general ed teacher, special ed teacher, and related service provider. In our WACs, the educational interpreter is a related service provider. It's called a related service provider. I find many interpreters haven't read the IEP, and they should have access to the IEP. They should know what it says. They're with that child more than anybody else in the entire school is. So they're part of the implementation of that IEP. It's important that they be able to have access to it, read it, understand it.
What do you mean by recreational
That would be like if I have a child that's pretty isolated, doesn't get to have many peers, other kids, hard of hearing kids, let's say with hearing aids or signing deaf kids or whatever, then I try and create opportunities, and I can put it in the IEP that they will be able to have social opportunities with a neighborhood school district that has a deaf program for a field trip, or if they meet once a month to do some kind of deaf cultural type activity, they can participate in that. For kids listening and using spoken language, some of these might be modifications that you would see on an IEP. Verbal instruction with visual support, providing a quiet environment, making sure they know who the speaker is before you start talking, that kind of thing. Okay, some tips for successful process. Remember, it's a year-long process. Write down what you feel your child needs. What are your challenges and what are your successes? Make copies for everybody that's going to come. Send them ahead of time if possible. Keep track of your child's progress. The coolest IEP meeting I ever went to was a mom that came with a folder. It was a little bit interesting because her child really wasn't deaf, but he was born with his speech mechanism not intact, and he would never be able to speak. So he will always use sign language, but he could hear. She wanted him in a deaf and hard of hearing program so he would have peers to be able to communicate with, so he could sign with them. He started out in a deaf and hard of hearing program in a neighborhood school district. So one district was contracting with another. It's pretty expensive to do that. Then that district decided that because he wasn't deaf, they thought it would still be more appropriate, let's say, for him to stay in his neighborhood school. So he did that for a year. Then the next IEP, the third IEP, and that's the one I went to, she was asking that he move back to the deaf and hard of hearing program that he had originally started at. When we got there, she opened up this file folder and she had charts in color, pie graphs. She had written down all of his assessment information that they had given her from their own evaluations, and she showed that he made far more progress in the deaf and hard of hearing program than he did in the neighborhood school. They just sat and looked at her, and there wasn't a lot of arguing they could do because it was very clear he did better in the deaf and hard of hearing program. So keep track of the data. Keep track of the evaluation information that they give you. Chart it. How much progress has he made this year? What's happened? So you can look at it. Mm-hmm.
When no progress is being made, that, I mean, what you give is a great example because you can show, you can do a comparison. But it's easy, I think, maybe for people to say, well, your child, that's just who your child is. But our child has Down syndrome as well as a hearing issue. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I would love to be able to show something like that where I've taken a video of a 2-year span and shown this is how he speaks. 2 years later, he's still, not communicating. I know that he can do more because, like you say, you know your child more and you see those things. But can you give any insight on that? Well, no progress being made.
No progress being made, to me, indicates more support is needed. More time in speech therapy is needed. More support. So I would ask for more support. So if he's getting 20 minutes twice a week, I would ask for 3 times a week or 4 times a week. Base it on no progress. We haven't made any progress. And then you're going to you possibly end up with, we disagree, and then I'll tell you what do you do when you come to a place where you disagree. If the child has the same IEP goal 2 years in a row, ask why. I've seen that. The same goal 2 years in a row shouldn't be. Shouldn't be. Either they missed, and that's a human error. I'm not going to fault anybody if you missed. If you set a goal too big and you weren't able to accomplish it. But I think if we do that, then halfway through the year we should realize that we made a mistake in the goal and that we need to reconvene and redo the IEP. Just like we said, review, revise, amend, because it's a year-long process. Kiddos shouldn't have the same goal 2 years in a row.
Then should you have one in the beginning and one in the end meeting to see the progress, or should it be more quarterly, or
It's up
what?
to you.
Okay.
Typically, they're once a year. But if you want to have more often than that, you can have them more often than
Is
that.
it typically in the beginning of the year to set goals?
Every district is different. Some want to have them in the spring for the following year. Some, when they enter into the district, say they enter in March, it's March to March. Some, if they enter in the fall, it's fall to fall. Some go by birth date. Depends on the district, they're all different. It wouldn't necessarily be an IEP meeting if you wanted to do it quarterly. It might be just a meeting where you want to see how are they doing. I want to see progress. How you're responsible for measuring the objectives, so I want to see how are they doing.
Can you say that you want to meet quarterly, or is that not?
I don't think it's necessary to put it in the IEP. It's fine to meet. I don't think you have to put it in the IEP. Just say, I just want to meet. Because I don't know that you necessarily need the entire team to be there. You might just need a few people there.
When it comes to measurements, I'd asked before, can I see your data that you're collecting? Because they're collecting data. I said they can't give it to me. Is that just at my school? I mean, have you heard of that?
No, I've not heard of that.
Data?
They should be able to share that data with you, absolutely.
I just asked a basic question. What grade level is my son reading at?
They should be able to give you that.
I tried that.
They
and I
should be
said-
able to give you what grade level.
That's when you ask for a meeting and you have them break it down. That's what I did. You just have to push that back.
Just Matt, run behind you and then you.
I have found, if we were in Seattle School District, that the only way to work with Seattle School District, if I want information, is to request his entire educational file from the school district. And when I know that I want them to hire somebody, is that I insist we have a meeting before the end of the previous school year, so they don't have the excuse that they don't have time to hire anybody.
Great idea. Great idea. You have to be the one in charge. You have to be the one that's keeping things going. Stay tuned in, know what's happening, be in charge, insist on a meeting. You have to. Good.
A little more about the assessments. My kiddo has been in developmental preschool, so they of course tested him for speech and where he was with speech and physical therapy, and he's been getting speech and PTOT. But now that he's going into kindergarten, that test was 2 years ago. So do you mean sort of the IEP itself and the follow-ups to the IEP would be our assessments going into kindergarten?
Is he on an IEP in kindergarten?
He's on an IEP in preschool.
And when does he start into kindergarten?
September.
So they can use that assessment information to continue to program for kindergarten.
Right.
They can, yeah.
And is
they
there
can use that.
anything else that you would consider assessment info?
Any standardized test. Well, any teacher may test actually too. How many letters does he know? How many numbers does he know? Does he say his alphabet? Can he count to 10? Those are assessments too. I have to tell you because, is it Nolan? Am I right? Roman. Oh, that's right. He spelled it right. Roman is here, and I'm excited that Roman is here, and I'll tell you why. A girlfriend of mine's daughter, when she was in the 5th grade, she called her own IEP meeting. In the 5th grade, I'm not joking. Because she didn't think the interpreter was doing an adequate job. She came home from school, and she said, Mom, I called my own IEP meeting. She goes, what? Yes, she did. And they met, and she explained her reason for calling the meeting, and they made a change as a result, and it was very successful after that. Very successful. Now that person has a master's degree from Gallaudet in counseling, and she works at this hospital. Wonderful, successful, bright young woman.
My daughters are in developmental preschool, and her IEP says she's supposed to have 600 minutes of social, emotional, working on her social, emotional goals and development. The teacher has been absent for a third, and I actually kept track, a third of the days. And there's, the substitute is just the regular elementary school substitute who has no special ed training. So clearly my daughter's not getting
all of the time and the accommodations and modifications she's supposed to be getting. What's the school's responsibility in those kind of scenarios
still need to
replace
provide it.
a skilled,
They still need to
specialized
provide it.
person?
So it would have to be in the lesson plan that she's left to use to teach from. So I would call a meeting and say, I'm concerned about this. Because they're still obligated to provide what's in the IEP, whether it's through a sub or the regular teacher that's there every day.
But there's no obligation to provide someone who has the same skill set, or if you don't have to provide a special ed person,
Right, no.
replacing a special ed person.
I'm sorry, my son has multiple neurological disorders, he has NF, ADHD, and the biggest issue is a sensory processing disorder. And he gets his OT, his fine motor skills, but because SPE really isn't a recognized disability yet, technically, he's not getting any occupational therapy to help him with his sensory needs. So there's a lot of behavioral issues and things like that. Is there anything that I can do to incorporate into the IEP and since it's not recognized?
Well, even if it's not recognized, when you write down the challenges that you see your child has, bring those challenges and say, what can we do to address these things? Doesn't matter if it's recognized or not. These are the issues concerns that I have, and I want somebody to work on these. These are my goals.
It's clear that they don't know how to handle it. He has trouble with transitions. Usually it takes sometimes 3 to 4 paraeducators just to work on him, and then there's the rest of the class. So it could be chaos sometimes. So it's clear that they don't know how to deal with the situation.
So I might, as a parent, say, is there some training that we can get to help you all work with my son? You might even investigate on your own people that might have expertise in that area. Ask to include the interpreter at the IEP meeting. Very important that the interpreter participate in the meeting. They have a lot of information because they see your child, how they interact with other kids, how they work with individual different teachers, and they need to be there to talk about that. Kind of talked about that already. Work with the school staff so they understand your values, your cultural values. Take time to correct wrong assumptions. Ask the staff questions when you don't understand something. Ask that a term be explained. Chances are somebody else needs it explained also. We had a house fire last June. My house burned down. And so now we're working with builders to rebuild it. And I swear builders have a totally different vocabulary than I have. I don't know what the guy's talking about half the time. And he'll call me on the phone, uses these acronyms, even a shower pan. I didn't know what a shower pan was. I had to stop and say, what's a pan for the shower? So I thought, this is exactly what parents go through. I have to stop him and say, okay, say that. What does that mean? What does that mean? And I have to take notes and write it out because I don't understand him most of the time. Here's one critical thing. Often parents are frustrated about placement of their child. And you go to an IEP meeting, and that's the burning topic in your heart and in your mind. I want to talk about placement. And so you go through this hour-long meeting, and the last 5 minutes of the meeting, you get to placement topic. And that's the most important topic. By then, everybody's kind of shuffling papers, and they're ready to go home. So I would, if I were you, if you have a topic that is the most important topic that you want to talk about, and you want to spend the most amount of time on it, state at the very beginning that tonight my real desire is to talk about placement. So if we don't have enough time tonight, I just want to say now that maybe we'll have to schedule another meeting so we can get through all this information and then come back and talk about placement, or we could talk about placement first, or I just want you to know that I want to save time to talk about placement. That will help you. Another idea is when you go into the meeting, don't sit next to each other if you're going with your spouse. Don't sit next to each other. Sit across the table. sit at the head of the table. Because then it's not a us and them. We're on one side of the table, the district's on the other side of the table. You want to create a team. So if you're sitting here and your spouse is across the table and they fill in those empty spots, it's more of a team, has more of a team feel to it. Just an idea, obviously you don't have to do it, but it does seem to have a better, create a better feel. Realize that people's perceptions differ. You in the school see your child differently. You see him at home. You have the advantage of seeing your child in more settings than the school, but the school has the advantage of seeing dozens of children the same age. And they'll have a different perspective. Value their perspective. Respect their perspective. Ask to hear what they see. Tell me what you see, and then share what you see. Know that some people may lack complete knowledge about an issue. Many school districts don't understand hearing loss. They don't understand a mild hearing loss. I try now not to say mild hearing loss. I try to say a 15 to 25 decibel hearing loss, or a 15 to 35, or whatever it might be. Because mild, I feel like mild makes it sound like they don't have to worry about that. The word mild makes it appear that it doesn't have an educational impact, and it does. So I try not to use that word. Try to use the decibel level. But it's just common in schools that they haven't had a lot of experience. So be prepared that you might be the one sharing the information, teaching them. Understand that there's limitations of the school system, and it is important to know your rights. You should, at every IEP meeting, they're obligated by law to give you what's called procedural safeguards. The font is, 4, and it's about 40 pages, and you have to get your magnifying glass out to read it. They're also in here. The font is a little bigger in the wax. Uh-huh.
Does those rules change every year?
Not typically, no. Julie, they usually, here you go. I'm supposed to give it to you again, so you end up with 8 copies. But do know your rights. Be specific about your requests for changes. Be specific. Ask what you can do as a parent to support the implementation of the IEP. What can you do at home or at school? Put your requests in writing. If you're asking for something like testing, assistive technology, an FM system, let's say, additional services, make your request in writing. Follow up with an email, but document that and keep it in a notebook or a file folder or something. Keep it. Ask to see the data the team is using to make decisions. RTI, response to intervention, requires schools to use data in their decision-making process. Ask to see that data. There's no reason why they can't just hand that right to you. Okay, now if you have a disagreement, if you want your child in this school district because you don't feel that your neighborhood school district has what would be the most appropriate, would be an appropriate program. So you're requesting that they send your child to a different district, or you want a different teacher, or you want a listening and spoken language program, not a sign program. Or you want a sign program and not a listening and spoken language, whatever it might be. And the district says, sorry, we don't have that. Or we think we are providing that. We think we have what's appropriate. We think we have what your child needs. We think we're doing exactly what your child needs. Whatever it is. Your choices are to go to mediation is one. And that is where OSPI, the State Education Department, contracts with a company called Sound Options. Greg Abel is the director of that company, Sound Options, and they will come out and do a mediation. So district's here and you're here and you can explain all that you see and all of the reasons why you see it this way. The district does the same. It's that person's job to try and come to an agreement between the two of you. They have no judgment in it. They're not going to give advice. Their job is just to try and mediate and come up with a solution. And often they do. They're able to.
You have to be prepared at that
They
level.
could be.
Could you just go in on your own?
Just go in on your own, you bet. Mhm.
How often does that happen?
Oh, I've been to probably 8 or 9 maybe mediations. Pardon? Over 30 years that I've been in. But part of that time was I was teaching at the university level, so I wasn't involved at all in K-12 setting. Here's an example. There was a kiddo that was had some real emotional behavioral issues, and the district put him in a private school, and very expensive school, but they didn't have anything. They agreed they had nothing that was appropriate, so they put him in a private school. He was in there for 3 years. And on the 4th year, the district said, you know what, we've created a program now that we think it would be best if he come back. And the mom said, not yet. Because her husband had just passed away from cancer, and she did not feel like it was going to be a stable time for him to make a change, come back to and have a totally different school. She wanted the stability and the structure and all that he had had. And the district said, you know what, we have what he needs right now. We're not willing to pay so much money, and it was a lot of money. We're not willing to do that. So they went to mediation, and as it turned out, the mediating officer said, well, when would you be willing to have him come back to the district? And she said, I don't want him to be there forever. You know, maybe 6 months. And then they said, so he says to the district, would 6 months be okay? 6 months more? And they said, yeah, that'd be fine. So that's what happened. The district would contact the mediation folks, but it's in your procedural safeguards. You just tell the district, I think we need to go to mediation. But I would agree agree to disagree. Agree that this is what we're in disagreement about. Make a statement, write a statement that says, this is what we disagree on. We think this, the district thinks this. This is kind of where we are. And agree on that much. Mediation.
Deaf and hard of hearing?
No.
Mediation?
No, all mediation. Thank you.
Sound options is not really.
Yeah, sound options is for all mediation, not just deaf and hard hearing. Another thing you can do is file an OCR complaint through the Office of Civil Rights, and they will investigate. You can also go to due process. And the paperwork, it's all in here. It's described in here, the WAPs. So those are kind of your 3 options. Uh-huh.
2 questions. One about interpreters in education studies. For middle school, high school, students are using sign interpreters. Do the interpreters share a lot of information with the parents? And the children feel like they have no separate space from their parents, because parents sometimes in elementary school get used to the interpreter giving them the updates versus the teacher, and they continue that, but no middle school or high school student wants a spy with them all day long, and that's what the interpreters become. But I don't know that educational interpreters don't necessarily have to follow the same guidelines that a certified sign interpreter might, as far as confidentiality. And those lines get very muddled, and it can create a lot of social and emotional issues for children in middle school and high school when those boundaries are being stepped on. Can you address that?
Yes. You hit my soapbox. I'll try not to get climb too high on this one. Yes, it's true. All that you said is exactly true. We, in Washington, we are one of 14 in the nation that don't have requirements for educational interpreters. They don't have, there's no criteria that the district must use when they hire an educational interpreter. So, because there's no criteria, they can hire whomever they feel would do the job well. And they base it on how many classes have they had, have they gone through an interpreter training program, what experience, da-da-da-da-da. But it does happen that interpreters don't have training as in an interpreter training program. They don't know necessarily boundaries or protocol or that kind of thing because they haven't had that training. They haven't had it. Confidentiality is a huge issue for people like these guys that are community interpreters. It's very clear. Confidentiality for this situation, these two would be able to talk to each other. They'd be able to talk to me, but they wouldn't go out and talk about who was here or what the topic was or where it was or anything like that. When I was interpreting, I wouldn't tell my husband where I was going, what I was interpreting, who I was interpreting for, nothing like that. In the education setting, it's a little bit different because where these two are a team or these two are a team and they can talk to each other, in the education setting, the team is the IEP team. So that interpreter is part of that team, and it's important that they are allowed to talk to the gen ed teacher, the regular ed, or the special ed teacher, the deaf ed teacher, the parent. It's important that they all talk about that. And their confidentiality stays there. So they don't talk about the child at the lunchroom table, in the staff faculty room, or outside of the school setting, anytime outside of this team. The two situations are different in that when you're in the education setting, all of a sudden you're working with the same kiddo for many years, potentially many years. From 4 years old to 10 years old. And you get to know the mom, you get to know the family. In some cases, I have a very dear friend that is a community interpreter, has been, and he all of a sudden became part of the K-12 setting, and he was very, I'm not going to be like one of those other interpreters that cross boundaries and da-da-da-da-da. And then pretty soon he's bringing a coat because this kid, it was his birthday, and he knew he wasn't going to get anything for his birthday, so he brought a coat to school. So I said, you're not going to cross any boundaries, huh? But it's different in education because you watch these kids grow up and you become very friendly with them, typically. You also can become very friendly with the parent. We want the parent to be talking to the teacher, not the interpreter. Though, it's okay to talk to the interpreter because they're part of the team. You're not breaking any confidentiality issue. But it's important that the parent go to the gen ed teacher or the special education teacher and get information about progress of kids, how things are going. Do they have friends at school? Are they playing well? How's their attitude? That kind of thing. That comes from the teacher, not the interpreter. The teacher takes care of discipline, not the interpreter. It's not the interpreter's job to discipline a kiddo. They want to keep in the role of the interpreter. So the way I encourage districts is to mix it up a lot. Don't let an interpreter stay with the same student for more than 2 years. Move it around so they have a different student that they're working with. So you don't develop that mom with a student. I see that happening. One student has an interpreter too long and they feel like they're the mom and they're in their face telling them, you need to pay attention. Well, every other hearing kid can do what they want in a class as long as it's okay with the teacher. They don't need an interpreter to be telling them they have to pay attention or they have to do this, this, this. Does that make sense? It's within reason, of course, but. So yes, we want to mix it up. We want interpreters to work with different kids. We want them to change age levels. We want parents to talk to teachers, not go through with an interpreter, to keep the boundaries clear. Does that answer the question?
But they say
replaced, so she would have seniority over anybody else coming in.
And there's only one in the district.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the hard part. You can't switch anybody when you've only got one. And you can't fire them because they've been a student for 2 years. Yeah, but we still could do some training on boundary issues and there's a thing called broken arrow curriculum that talks about teaching a child to work with an interpreter and how as a child gets older, they take on more responsibility in the interpreting situation and the interpreter has less responsibility. And we want kids to role play that and learn how to make that relationship work so that by the time they're a senior in high school, they can say, I prefer interpreting that has more fingerspelling or less fingerspelling or more ASL or more signed English, or I prefer, so that when they go out into the community and request an interpreter, they know what to request. They can evaluate their interpreter. So there's a curriculum that focuses on that, and I can send that to your district if they don't have it already.
Carol, can you shed some light beyond the obvious financial implications as to why public school districts who have a DHH program within their educational service district are not referring families to the ESD DHH program? They're almost keeping it hush and not letting parents know that they have options.
If it's not financial, I'm not sure I know. It can cost $50,000, $60,000 for one district to contract with another district to meet the needs of their kiddo. $60,000. So when you walk into that school and say, I really don't want my child to go here, I want them to go 30 miles away, you have to know it's $60,000 you're asking for. Every year, in their mind probably, every year for the next 12 years, they're thinking $60,000. Now, there are many districts that are so open and saying, yeah, I think so too. I think that'd be far better than what we have to offer. They're very open. Some districts aren't. It's really people-based, administrative-based. But I find many districts to be very, very, absolutely they need an FM system. If they don't know what it does, and I explain what it does, and I have a little cassette tape that they listen to, and they go, oh my gosh, absolutely we need to get that. Really willing, right then. We know we can see that it's going to help, so we want to make it happen. But I don't know why they would not, other than financial. There's educational service districts, ESDs, and there are regional service centers to help support the districts in that region. Okay. Sometimes you'll have school districts that have a deaf program, and kids will come from other school districts to feed. That's what we like to see, actually, is critical mass, because we tend to feel like the support services are better. But sometimes an ESD, the regional center, will have a cooperative program. So the kids in the school districts in that area will buy into that co-op, and they're served by the ESD, as opposed to the school district. So the employees are employed by the educational service district, not the school district. Is not like that. The ESD that has a co-op is up in Anacortes. It's ESD 189, Northwest ESD. They have a co-op. Lots of ESDs will co-op psychology services, school psych services, because if you have a small school district and you can't afford to have a full-time school psych, then you and 5 other school districts can go together. The ESD hires the school psychologist and serves the districts in that area. Or they do that sometimes with occupational therapists or physical therapists, because they're too small to hire a full-time person. What I would push for is audiology services. There are far too many school districts that don't have audiology services, and I think that's critical, really critical. Yes?
In addition to financial, it could also be philosophical, in that the district thinks that, yeah, we have a really good total communication program, but really they don't, but they think they do, and so they aren't going to tell you about other options, because
Or they might want to build their program,
Right,
so they don't want to lose any kids.
right, but you don't want your child to be guinea pig.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So, is a parent within their rights, my current plan is to transliterate for my child as he goes into kindergarten? Is it within my rights to do that if the school district refuses to accommodate his needs? Does that make sense?
Yeah, you mean use cute speech? You would be the interpreter? I have seen that happen, but I see the district paying you, not volunteering. If they can't find anybody and that's what that child needs, then I would suggest that they hire you to provide it, not, you go in. I've had moms interpret for their kids before. It's not the best, for obvious reasons, but when you're in a small area and there's nobody else available, I've seen that happen, yes. But I sure wouldn't volunteer. I mean, I shouldn't think the school district would expect you to volunteer, I guess is how I should say that. There was another question?
What is the 3-year review? I'm in Bellevue School. This is something that they just do? That you have
No.
to-
3-year evaluation is a requirement that we do a full evaluation every 3 years to see if we're still on the right track, if we're still. It's a full evaluation. You don't have to do an evaluation every year for the IEP. A full evaluation, you don't have to. You can just use the data that you have from your curriculum assessments. And
The same changes can happen any year.
yes.
It's just an evaluation of whether services should be provided.
Yes, and are you still progressing? It's just a measurement to see if they're still progressing.
And on that fall evaluation in the beginning, and then I think Kent and Stella does it every 2 years. When they do that second year, what testing should they be doing? Is it full that they did in the beginning, or do they pick and choose?
I don't know if I can answer that. I would. I think it depends on the kid, the questions that they have. Usually it's a full battery, but it's every 3 years, not 2 years, including a cognitive evaluation, an academic evaluation, speech language evaluation. Yes. Yes. I wanted to mention we have a few minutes. There is another option. Oh, go ahead. Do we have an interpreter? What
Somali.
Somali? Do we have a Somali
Can I
interpreter?
language, Italian language?
I'm sorry, we
I
don't.
want. Okay. This is an interpreter for you.
Okay, fabulous.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Waxaan rabnaa horta ilmaha laga caawiyo after school oo homework laga caawiyo. Waxaan aragnay intaan hadda aniga aan hadda joogo inaysan ku jirin dadka disableyaasha ama sign language yaqaana aysan ku jirin meelaha communityyaasha iyo lagu waxay. Marka arrintaas maxaa laga damacsan yahay? Maxay sababay? Tan kale su-aasha labaad waxaa weeye.
He says when the sign language, the children learn sign language like this, you know, we have this boy.
Yes.
When they come from the school, after school, there is he said we need teachers helping us for the homework. Like, I don't know.
Okay.
Do you mean teaching sign language to families
yeah.
so they can
He
help
said,
with
yeah,
homework?
we don't have those kids, those teachers helping us for homeworks.
meelo badan oo laga caawiyo carruurta homework markaan arkay un raadiyey ma aanan arag wax disable oo maarata laga caawiyo homework.
So he said, we need those people helping us if there is any help.
Yes, you can request that the school district help you learn sign language by sending you to a class, making the class available, by hiring somebody to come in and teach a class, because that helps you implement the IEP, helps you contribute to the implementation of the IEP. So you as a parent can request that. That's part of our Washington law.
You have to.
You have to request it though.
You know, it's for why.
okay waxaan rabaa dariska la meesha laga codsanayo maadaama waxaan joogaa waddanka dhan baan waxaan joogaa 9 months yeah
You
you
say I've been here only 9 months, so he don't know about anything what's going on in his own environment. So, what can I tell him? So he have to request in the school teachers.
Yes, ask to have a meeting with his son's IEP team, with an interpreter,
Okay.
and ask that the school help him to learn sign language. And that can be a variety of ways. Going to a class, having somebody coming into the house, somebody coming and having a parent sign language class in the district, going to the community college and taking the class, something like that.
Anuu speak.
Xasameynaysa iskuulka dhexdiisa ku codso ama iskuulka ku hayo kadib ku siinaya xadeed.
Okay, waa hadda iskuulka waa laga caawiya waa qabaan iskuulka way joogaan grade 9 waay hadda. Okay, this okay intaasaan ku eedan.
Say thank you.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Uh-huh.
I have a question. In terms of, you were saying that the evaluation is every 3 years?
Uh-huh.
Now, if you feel that the evaluation should be sooner because they did it like the last day of the school year for the next year, you can ask for it in writing, and if they disagree at that point, do you then do due process? Or
Yes, yes, you can. Usually that wouldn't be a big enough, I shouldn't say it that way maybe, but usually the date of assessment wouldn't be enough to cause a due process hearing. Unless you have issues with the assessment evaluation that you don't think it's accurate, that you want to do more evaluation to confirm or deny that assessment result. One assessment is not, it's not good to have just one assessment. You want a couple so you can check and balance.
And when we say assessment, we're not, I'm talking about, we had assessments outside of school, but then
the school did their own psychological
Okay.
evaluation.
Uh-huh.
So I'm talking about like the school's evaluation, psychological evaluation. Is that the same as what you're saying, talking about in terms of?
Having those real often?
Well, it's because I didn't like when they did it, so they only had a short time. They couldn't get my part of it done. So to me, it wasn't a full.
Yeah, then I would ask for it to be
Right, and if they.
done correctly, that you don't feel like it was done correctly.
And if they refuse. at that-
Looking at an outside?
No, you can have an independent evaluation. You have the right to an independent evaluation if you don't agree with the assessment that the school district has used.
We pick and choose and we decide whether or not they will use that or not.
Uh-huh.
That was one of my questions, I think, if I understand what she's asking is, what happens if your evaluations outside differ from what their evaluation of your child is, so that they don't think that they need as many services as the outside? Is that, do you have to do a mediation situation with
Yes.
that?
A what?
A mediation or a due process. Yeah, if they decide not to use that information, I would bring in people that could help that discussion happen at the table. Bring in maybe the person that did the assessment.
Right, yeah.
They can talk about why they think that assessment is accurate. Bring more people to the table.
How long does this evaluation last? Like for the so the assessment is just from all this data that they have from like Children's Hospital and all the therapists. Then you go in for the evaluation. How long does that take?
You mean a district the district would take the evaluations, like from Children's, they're going to use those evaluations as part of the evaluation. That would be a part of it all. Then they may have additional academic assessment depending on how old your kiddo is to add to that. And it would only take a short time, a couple weeks.
So they don't actually evaluate the child. They're just taking in all this data.
They do.
They do evaluate the child, but they use other additional evaluations that are given to them by outside people like Children's Hospital. They use those along with the assessments that they have given.
So, he's going through a constraint therapy, so I said, well, that's not real fair that you're going to assess him or evaluate him when, one of the arms will be casted or whatnot. And he says, oh, it's not a big deal. We can still just, do the testing or evaluations that we need to
do?
Well, they're probably doing that assessment in order to write goals and objectives.
Okay.
So it's not a matter of it will deny services or not. It's, I need to know baseline so I know what to write for goals and objectives. That's my guess. Okay, so IEPs are part of special education. They require that a child have specially designed instruction. That's the pivotal thing, specially designed instruction. If your child doesn't need specially designed instruction, then it means they don't qualify for special education and they don't qualify for an IEP. So let's say you have a middle school kiddo, deaf, straight A's, don't need resource room support or pre-teaching vocabulary or even speech support, but they do still need maybe an FM system. They still need preferential seating. They need visual support, speech-to-text transcription, something like that. But academically, they're doing fine. If that happens, then we would want to consider them as a what we call a 504 kid, or write a 504 plan. 504 plan comes from the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. It's the same act that gave us wider doorways so wheelchairs can go in, and bathrooms and ramps and all of those things. It's the same law. There's no money attached to this like there is special education law. When your child is identified as a special education student that's eligible for an IEP and services, the district would get money for him. There is no money for a 504. So if you have a child that's ineligible, if they say to you your child's no longer eligible for special ed, and you want to say yay, that must mean that we've done a good job, that they're able to be in a gen ed classroom without pull-out support services. They're doing well. But it's a little bit scary because parents feel like I'm losing my power here. I don't know if I'll be able to get the services that I need. You can have the exact same accommodations on a 504 plan that you had on an IEP, exactly the same. But it will be a different group of people. Every district has to have a 504 coordinator. And then in your building, you have to have a 504 team. You always want to make sure that you write up a plan, a 504 plan, that includes accommodations. The reason that you want it on a plan is because then every teacher would find out what accommodations that child should have. Yeah.
I was told by the nurse at my son's school that it really is kind of up to her as to whether or not she tells the teachers about the disability in terms of 504. She said because some teachers pick on kids and make fun of kids if they know their disability. So it's one of those things that it's weird. I know you need to like be, aware of what you want them to know. I'm thinking, well,
It would be my opinion that whatever I have on the 504 plan, I would want them to know about. If there's something that I don't want shared among the staff, then I wouldn't put it on the 504 plan. I might talk to the nurse about it. If there's some private thing that your student would need to go to a nurse for, something, then I might talk to them individually, but it might not appear on the 504 plan. But all of your accommodations should be on the 504 plan. No, that is not true. It's not up to her to decide who hears and who doesn't. That's not true. Mm-hmm. Yes, I believe so. That's a good question. I'm trying to think of it. Do they sign it every year?
Because our counselor's the one who set it up, and then she said that it wasn't necessary for the teacher to sign it each year.
Somehow they have to be told, though.
Yeah, so I talked to them. He's only in kindergarten now, but his current teacher is very insensitive, and she's told other parents and made it really difficult. So now I'm working with the principal, and the principal and I are going to meet with the new teacher.
Good.
That kind of thing.
Good. I don't know the answer to that. You have to sign in. You don't have. I don't know the answer to that. I'm sorry.
So
Some districts have a 504 pot of money. Some do not, and it comes out of the building fund. So if you have an elementary school student and they need an FM system, it would come out of that school's budget. But most schools are creating a pot of money because they realize that's not very effective to take it out of a building fund. Yes. Interpreters also would be an accommodation. A salary of interpreter would be under 504 plan. Oh, that's right. You have it on your PowerPoint. We're almost done anyway. Usually, no, if you have a speech therapy would be a specially designed instruction. So that would be an IEP, but it might be speech-only IEP. There wouldn't be math and reading and science. But they qualify for speech. That's specially designed instruction. Uh-huh. Good question. I don't know.
We need them.
That's a good, I hadn't even thought about it, actually.
It's come up several times that when some kids aren't qualifying, but they are going to a neighborhood preschool and they need access or support for their hearing aids.
Carol, can you repeat her question?
The question was, do you think that 504 plans will ever get down to the preschool level? Good question.
Can you comment also, for the people in the audience whose kids don't have hearing loss, is there a similar resource in the state for those parents for IEP support? I mean, the kids, in some ways, if you have a child with hearing loss, we're very fortunate to have Carol to refer to. But if the kids don't have hearing loss, is there some?
There is for autism. There is for autism. I wish there was somebody for there is for multiply handicapped if they have vision and hearing, one or the other, vision and hearing loss. So if you have a student that has that is deaf plus other issues, then I usually have another person that's got a lot more background in that than they go out and do an evaluation. And then autism, the Autism Project is up at ESD 189 Northwest ESD. Carol Taylor is the person that you would contact to get support for that. Carol Taylor.
Would Asperger's fall under
Yes. Yes. Asperger's would fall under the Autism Project also. She's at Northwest ESD, Educational Service District in Anacortes.
Carol, there's actually 2 more resources.
Thank you.
At the state level in Olympia, through OSPI, is the Office of Special Education Ombudsman, and that person is Kristen Hennessy, and she is a neutral party. She knows the laws. She has to remain neutral, but she can give you information. And then there's an organization called PAVE. It used to stand for Parents for Vital Education. They've changed it to a partnership kind of thing. But their number is 1-800-5-PARENT, and they know the WACs like the back of their hands. And
I've
they're
not gotten too much help from PAVE.
try them again.
Christine's really good.
I've been working with PAVE. My other one is 26 years old, and I tried working with him when he was in.
They've changed. They've responded to parent feedback, and it's been
really good.
different.
And PAVE is different than my position. PAVE is an advocacy group. That is a great resource to have a PAVE parent come with you to an IEP meeting. They're a great advocacy. Unlike my position where I go into the school and help support the school and you with developing a program or something. So it's a little bit different, but. Go ahead.
How do you get the school district to figure out, or who figures out if a child with a hearing loss needs an IA who signs or an interpreter? Because
That's a
of
good
the
question.
behaviors, because they keep trying to get the folks to be IAs who sign, even though they're expecting interpreters.
Yeah, I said we're pretty loosey-goosey in our state as far as educational interpreters go. Some districts have them in a professional technical position. Some don't have that position in the district, and they either have certified or classified. And because they're not certified teachers, they're considered classified.
They actually have both, but they're taking a student who's coming in he has a hearing loss, but he doesn't need an interpreter. But he has a hearing loss. And I'm like, that sounds like he needs an interpreter if he needs somebody who signs to him. So who helps say?
The
no, I
team,
want
the team. The team would. As a parent, I would ask for the most qualified interpreter that they have. Because everything that that teacher says is filtered through the hands and the skills of that individual. So you can have the very best teacher in that building, but not the best instruction going through to that child because of the inability of the interpreter to get that information across. One more. We gotta stop.
Another resource is rightslaw.com, or they have several books, but it's WRIGHTSLAW, so it's rightslaw with the W.com, and they publish several books, and they have a really pretty thorough website. And it's not Washington specific, but it's covers just general IEPs and things like that, and that's another good resource.
And one more resource that I would encourage you all to go to is handsandvoices.org. Written out, www.handsandvoices.org. It's a national organization for families with kids with hearing loss. Whether you use your hands to communicate or your voices, we're all collectively together, want to work together to promote issues for deaf and hard of hearing kids. They have a great website with lots of IEP information, lots of support, lots of articles, and we have a Washington chapter. It's just WA-handsandvoices.org. It would be awesome if you could all become members. It's a group that needs members. But there's information on the Washington website too.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
That was a lot of useful information, I think, for general approach to IEP and some great suggestions we can see across the table. I think it really helps set it up properly. I just want to remind you to fill out the evaluation forms and please add topics that you'd like to hear about. We really do take that into consideration when we plan each year's sessions. The next session is in August about medical evaluation of hearing loss for those of you who are interested. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I have to thank Lisa Herber for making these events happen. Thank you.